Revachol is a city located on the island of Les Cailloux. It's inside of an archipelago known as Insuland. 50 years ago, a constitutional monarchy that spanned 3.5 centuries buckled under inbreeding, madness, drug abuse, and embezzlement. Then came Zarnath. Far away from Insuland on the Isla of Grad, a horrible little mistake of biology occurred. Somewhere, in some body, a protein misfolded into something alien, manipulative, destructive, and incompatible with human life. A prion that further misfolded every protein that contacted it. For reasons lost to the chaos of history, that prion disease spread unchecked until it became a pandemic. The destruction of that disease heightened the contradictions in Grad so much that an economist named Kraz Mazov found himself leading a communist revolution. His government provided revolutionary public health care, ending the pandemic. In March of 2002, the Commune of Revachol transmitted their March decree, inspired by the revolution in Grad. They claimed Insuland for the communists, with the citizens' militia marching for them. They killed the final suzerain of Revachol. 6 years later, a counter-revolution took back control of Grad. Mazov, according to Gradian historians, killed himself as the palace was surrounded. Grad was welcomed into a humanist international treaty organization called the Coalition of Nations, along with participation in the Moral Intern, Insercom, and the Bank of the World. The real became the global reserve currency. This coalition made its way into Insuland, teaming up with the Royalist Army in their blue uniforms while coalition gunboats indiscriminately bombarded the capital. For 2 years, artillery blasted away at Revachol until finally the commune ceded Revacholian sovereignty away. Even the royalists were betrayed. There was no more nation, no more commune, no more kingdom. Simply a zone of control. It is now 51, and a police officer in an obliterated hotel room is trying to figure out how many drugs he needs in his system before he can destroy the universe.
Speak about these drugs, son. Speak about these drugs, son. Speak about these drugs, son.
Welcome to the Worst of All Possible Worlds, the first and only podcast to steal its intro from Blowback. I'm the worst of all possible AJs.
I'm the worst of all possible Brians.
And I'm the worst of all possible Josh.
Today's episode, Disco Elysium.
That's right, baby. Disco Elysium, what I was just saying to you, isn't real.
What?
It didn't actually happen. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah.
There's no place called Grad?
No, there is no place called Grad. It's in a video game.
You can't just lie to me like that. That's fucked up.
If you wondered what that word Isla was, it's because we're in this weird sci-fi world where there aren't really just continents. There are these land masses that are separated by an ocean of the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
Made concrete.
Manifest.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the Disco Elysium here, we are talking about it today because this game has come back into the consciousness quite a bit lately, it seems like.
Some for good reasons, some for not so great reasons.
It's what we call a sort of, poetic irony that has brought Disco Elysium back.
Yeah.
But, every week on this show, we do a case study in the pop culture of a dying empire. And man, you want to talk about a game that tackles the topic of dying empire?
Yeah.
Disco Elysium is it.
This game is huge. This game has over 1 million words written into it.
It doesn't seem huge. It's kind of a limited scope.
Yeah,
but
the map is very small.
It's enormous. Like in comparison, I think Fallout New Vegas had somewhere around 120,000 words.
Right.
War and Peace has 600,000.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, so this game has more words than that. You are not going to read all of them when you play through the game.
No. You're
You're going to read a lot of them.
You're gonna read a lot of them, and the fact that there aren't any typos in it, I think, is a fun fucking miracle. At least that I've been able to
I
find.
didn't spot any. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think they've used some of their patches to be able to, to deal with those.
Sure, but it's also that we are not going to be able to cover the entirety of this game in the amount of time that we have for a podcast. I know we could probably talk for 6 hours about this game, but we're not going to do that to you.
Like another podcast did, AJ?
Yeah, like another podcast did, which actually I think is a very fun listen. But look, I love this game. I think there are things about this game that are, it makes the flaws of the game all the more pronounced because of how much I love it. But it's mostly nitpicking. Like, this is probably one of the greatest games ever made. It doesn't have sort of the main sort of mechanics that you would normally expect. It is mostly about the words. And the man who wrote 500,000 Words is a man named Robert Kurvitz. He's an Estonian novelist. He dropped out of school when he was 15 years old, and he decided to really go whole hog on a D&D game that he was playing with his friends.
Yeah.
He wrote a novel called Sacred and Terrible Air, which is also set in the world of Elysium,
yes,
which he built with his friends around a tabletop game.
Part of what makes this game so large is that it's just dense. There is so much history. There is so much about like technology and the way that the world forms, as you can tell from the introduction. None of that stuff is stuff that happens in the game. Right. This is all stuff that you get little peeks at here and there, depending on where your stats are and who you're talking to and how you talk to them.
Yeah.
This stuff is incredibly intricate, and it's because this world has actually existed outside of this video game for like a decade or more.
Right.
Oh, wow.
Because
really?
the people of Zaum, Zaum is the company, the developer, but it was also just an art collective. It was just these sort of like, I don't know, Meow Wolf or something, but in Estonia. And they didn't have a George R. R. Martin to help them out, unfortunately. So they had been building up this tabletop game for a very long time. I don't think there's like a published version of the game. I think it was just something that they did together.
Sure.
And all of these sort of derivative works came out of it, most notably Sacred and Terrible Air. Well, most notably until Disco Elysium.
Sure.
Yes.
So what was the period of time then between Sacred and Terrible Air and Disco Elysium?
Sacred and Terrible Air, I think, was published in 2012.
Yeah, they founded Zaum in 2016,
Yeah.
and then the first version of Disco Elysium came out in 2019.
Right.
So it was about 7 years from the publication of the novel, but they had been playing this game for a very long time before that.
Yeah.
So did you guys all play Disco Elysium when it came out? Because I did.
Yes, I sure did.
Not right when it came out, but I had a lot of time the year after it came out.
Oh, okay, sure.
A lot of free time in that year.
Yeah.
Why? What happened? What happened?
Well, I played Disco Elysium. Is what happened.
Right. It's a very long game. Yeah, I mean,
30 hours.
For me, it's a game that it was interesting going back to it again for this show because it is so intertwined with a very specific moment in my memory. You know, it was that run up to the 2020 election, the fact that a lot of the references in there and some of the voices even are, you know, people from the Chapo Trap House extended universe or whatever.
Yeah, right.
There was something about going back to it where it was like, holy shit, like this world is so connected to where I was at that point in my life. And so for a moment, the like, I don't know, nostalgia or whatever was so overwhelming that it took me a little bit to actually get back into the world of the game.
Yeah,
but then when I did, it absolutely knocked my socks off.
The art director of the game is Alexander Rostov, and he and Robert Kurvitz had like gone way, way back. They were like childhood friends, and they had tried a lot of different ventures together. And the origin of Disco Elysium is that one day, apparently Robert just showed up to Alexander's house, knocked on the door, and when Alexander opened the door, Robert said to him, "We have failed at so many things. Let's fail at making a video game together."
That's sort of like a podcast I know about.
Yeah. I was going to say the same thing. That's remarkably similar
Yeah.
to how this thing got started. That's awesome.
This is just whatever happens whenever communists make something.
That's right.
That's how we introduce
If
it.
we're going to fail, at least we can fail together, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the huge strengths of this game is that there were so many people working on it at once. There are, I believe, like 8 or 9 credited writers on this, in addition to Robert Kurvitz. He wrote 500,000 of the words, but that means
that's only half of the words.
That's only half of the words, and that it is so cohesive and coherent a vision is absolutely incredible.
I mean, the way that this world works too is it's not just like lore. It's not, you know, it's not.
lore
it doesn't
for the
work
sake of
the way
lore.
that a Dungeons and Dragons game works, where there's like, you have a fucking alignment on the chart of what kind of good or bad you are.
Well, yeah,
Or-
and that's mostly gone out of fashion, I will say, in D&D and tabletop in general. Like, there are people who still use the alignment system. For the most part,
Sure.
it's thrown out the
But
window.
like, for the most part, it's like, well, what kind of spells do you know? What kind of history is there to the larger mythical world? You know, Disco Elysium is about like, who is this person? What do they believe? What are the political movements that have happened in this time? Because it's very much based in the 20th century.
Yes.
And to some degree, the 19th century.
And the knowledge that you get and how your character actually perceives the world is entirely grounded in the way that you build the character at the top, as well as how you continue to slot points into different skill categories throughout. So we might as well talk about, what happens when you start the game up right away, right?
Yeah, you have 3 builds that they provide for you. Intellect, sensitive, and physical, I believe.
Sounds right.
And then there's a custom mod that you can do as well if you just want to allocate your points into different categories.
This is
as
the
you
sort
see
of
fit.
thing that is usually a death sentence for me personally.
Sure.
It's like,
Yeah.
here's a game that I have not touched at all. I don't know anything about it, and it wants me to put a bunch of numbers into a bunch of things. They're going to determine how the whole thing works.
Well, this
Yeah.
is like the problem with a lot of immersive sims from like around the turn of the millennium. Like Deus Ex has this problem.
Like I had to restart Fallout 1 like 4 times. And after a while it's like, well,
System Shock
I'm not
2.
having fun anymore.
right. But I mean, the protections of Disco Elysium are that no matter what you pick, you're going to get a different experience
Exactly.
in it, and
Yeah.
it ultimately doesn't matter.
You can't lose because you built your character incorrectly.
Yeah,
it's
this
not
is-
like
this
System
is-
Shock 2 where like,
Yeah.
oh no, I built myself into the corner
Yeah.
and I'm like halfway through the game and I have to start the whole thing over again. That's not
Yeah,
going to happen
this is
to you
Night
Disco
in the
Elysium.
Woods with stats.
Yes.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Everything takes place in the dialogue trees, and it's a game, I think, ultimately about embracing failure. It's a game that, like, there is a door in this game that you cannot open.
Right.
Yeah.
It
It just won't open.
just won't open, and
and then you can even like go on this whole path where you think about it for a really long time.
Yeah.
And then you come to the conclusion that it can't be opened.
and you have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
And I think the game is, it represents the best of like D&D or tabletop games, which is failing forward. You never fail backward at Disco Elysium. You only ever fail forward unless you die, which happens a lot in the early game.
And which unfortunately happens very close to the beginning.
Yeah.
And if you didn't think about it and didn't like make a save in the first 10 minutes, you have to replay the entire opening again.
Right.
Yeah.
Which does sort
Which
of
is annoying.
implicate a behavior that I think the developers don't really want to cause in their players.
Yes.
Absolutely.
But really what we need to know here about the core of the character build.
It doesn't really matter what the specifics of these categories are. They all have kind of these
Right.
floaty names. But
Yeah.
basically, like, you have stats related to how good of a detective you are,
Right.
like how well you can recreate a crime scene.
Yeah.
You have stats related to like how well you can manipulate stuff, like picking locks, etc.
And then there's
There-
one that's to do with how well you can manipulate people.
Yes,
which is
yeah, you
important.
like how much of a policeman you are.
Right.
There are stats related to your physical
Right.
attributes. How
Right.
well can you land a punch or take a hit? And then there are stats that are creepy.
yeah,
One name, one is like, ooh, if you get enough of these, you can be sort of like Agent Dale Cooper from a David Lynch property,
Right,
yeah.
and you can figure things out on a supernatural level. So of course, it's named after a David Lynch property, and that is Inland Empire, a different thing.
It's not Twin Peaks at all. No. There are no damn fine cups of coffee to be found in Disco Elysium.
Just to highlight one more of the supernatural ones, there is something called shivers,
Yes.
which gives you all kinds of weird visions of the world around you that
Yeah.
mostly don't really reflect in gameplay. There are a couple of shivers checks here and there,
Right.
but it's more about just giving you a fun look sort of underneath the surface of the game.
Right, you can talk to the city itself of Martinaise with shivers.
And Shivers, of course, named after the Ed Sheeran song of the same name.
Yes, absolutely. Ed Sheeran and Disco Elysium. Look, he finds his way into all great fantasy properties in one way or another.
You are a cop. You have a name,
Yeah.
but you don't know
what
it.
it is.
We'll talk about that because you
Yeah.
don't know anything right now.
Right.
You are a blank slate. You start the game in a void.
Yes. Your brainstem and your limbic system start talking to
Oh,
you.
Your ancient reptilian brain.
Yes.
is
These
the name.
voices, like you want to talk about like setting the tone of a game up top. the way that this game unfolds its narrative at the very beginning with these voiceovers, with these really deep, throaty, guttural,
nothing, only warm primordial blackness.
Yes.
Pretty good. Yeah.
So you get these these things, and so you start on this very existential level. What is living? What am I doing? What is an X something?
Yeah.
What
Yes.
happened? Oh, my wife must have just left. That's like the first little bit of information that you, the player, get about anything is like, well, this guy's wife left him recently.
right.
Yeah.
But what it mostly clears for you, and
Recently.
Yes.
what it mostly clears for you, and this is important, is that up front, you know right away what kind of game this is going to be. This game is going to be largely taking place inside your own brain. Like there's a lot of things that you're in, and so that's thing one. And thing two is you are going to be reading a fuckload.
Yeah.
This is a text-centric game, and you can turn on voice acting. You can have you can have those things read to you. But
Yeah,
if you
and
don't like interacting with things in a text-based setting, this is not the game for
This
you.
game already takes about 30 hours to beat, and when you have the director's cut voice acting, which has voiced just about everything in the game, it's going to take a lot longer, and you'll probably want to turn it off at some point.
Just so you
did
can
that.
speed through some stuff.
I at first was like, because again, the director's cut having all that new voice, I was like, I'd love to hear it. Did it for maybe 2 hours, and I was like, I can't.
yeah.
I can't.
So you wake up in a stupor. You have destroyed your hotel room.
There's a hole in the window because you
Yes.
threw your shoe out the window.
Yep.
You have to find your clothes. You have to see all of the damage that you've caused. You look in the mirror and realize you don't know what your face looks like. So you
It's
try
too
to get a good
steamy.
look at your face. And
You're making the most horrible expression.
The expression.
And so part of what this game is going to be is it's a mystery. You're going to be putting together the mystery, but you're also going to be putting together what the hell you were doing for like the last
Right.
week that you were there. Because
Right.
it looks like you didn't do any detective work at all.
Right.
You
No.
just went on a bender.
And once you step out of the hotel room, those suspicions are further confirmed when you meet a mysterious woman who basically immediately proceeds to tell you, hey, you're not looking so hot. At least you're still alive, basically.
And your only dialogue options are basically saying, okay, I'm fine. And then just like 3 or 4 different ways to hit on her.
Right.
Yeah. I have failed every single time I've tried to hit on her and said, I think, and this is actually what really won me over. Like all the stuff at the beginning was prelude. And then when you can scream out the lines, I want to make fuck with you.
Yeah.
I was in for the rest of the
And
game.
then you take a hit. You actually lose health, or you lose emotional health when that happens. Because this is like the game Indigo Prophecy. And when you go around, you can cause damage to your mental health for seemingly no reason.
Oh God, David Cage adapting Disco Elysium would be my nightmare.
No, don't even bring that thought into possibility. There's really two
There's
health...
a man hanging from the tree over there. We should go investigate. I'm Mom and Jaden.
Stop. There are 2 main health systems. There's physical health, which is built into your endurance stat.
Yeah.
And then there's emotional mental health, which is built into your volition stat.
Yeah.
And you will frequently take damage throughout. And if your stat gets too low in either of those categories, you die immediately.
Very likely the first time you make it down to the ground floor and you start talking to Kim Kitsuragi.
Oh, Kim!
You can make a mistake and you can lose your emotional health there. And typically you start with about 2. And you will just run out of jump through a window and bleed out and die. And you will see it manifested as just a headline of like, police officer jumps through a window and fucking dies.
Yeah. Because when you hit the low morality, like you just have a mental breakdown.
Yeah.
And then health, you have a heart attack and die.
Hey there, you are listening to a preview of a premium episode of The Worst of All Possible Worlds. If you'd like to listen to the rest of this, head on over to our Patreon. That's patreon.com/worstofall. And you can listen to not only the rest of this episode, but our entire backlog of premium episodes, bonus episodes, and if you subscribe at the $10 tier, you will get an extra episode of the podcast every single month. Again, that is patreon.com/worstofall. Hope to see you there.